Hello, you've probably heard of the Tiananmen event many times, right? But what is exactly the story about? Let's find out together. In 1986, a Chinese professor named Li Qi, after returning from the West, went to university to visit. In his speech, evaluated China as a poor, underdeveloped country due to its arbitrary and rigid government. In order to grow and prosper, China needed a political and democratic reforms, he said. This view was supported by many students and intellectuals. Because of that, protests broke out, although they were only small ones. Right after that, the leaders were arrested. At this time, General Secretary Hu Yaobang was accused of being too soft. He had to resign in 1987. Even so, Hu Yaobang was still loved by students and viewed as an advanced reformer. In April 1989, he died suddenly from a heart attack, but the students didn't think so. They still thought that his death was related to his resignation. They flocked to the Tiananmen Square both to remember him and to protest the demand for a number of demands such as demanding Hu Yaobang's views on democracy and freedom, transparency in anti-corruption work, no press censorship, and increased educational costs. The demonstrations were small and sparse at first, but grew larger and more united with a number of up to 100,000 people, including students and knowledge groups. As for the government, they have two opposing views. Zhao Ziyan wanted to have peaceful dialogue. Otherwise, Li Ban wanted drastic repression, not accepting any claims. Despite opposing views, Southern was still the head of the country, so he compromised and made some concessions to students. He said in his speech that it's reasonable for students to worry about corruption and that students should return to study to build the country with the government. The majority of students were satisfied with the speech and withdrew. But there were some tougher students who believed that the government's response wasn't enough, and these people still called for protests. In particular, in this time, it was a major Chinese event, the extremely important Sino-Soviet summit after 30 years of confrontation, which was scheduled to be held in Tiananmen and invited journalists from all over the world to report. Taking this opportunity, the student union went to Tiananmen Square to protest by going on a hunger strike, forcing the government to make concessions. As a result, under the direction of Deng Xiaoping, the government stubbornly refused to give in. Instead, welcoming the Soviet diplomatic delegation was held at the airport. The whole world considered this to be China's most shameful event in history. And to be fair, the Chinese government decided to let the protesters pay the price by using the army to suppress the protesters. This action was opposed by Hu Yaobang, but Deng Xiaoping still decided to act. At the end of May, China began to send convoys of armored tanks and troops to the city. Here, the conflicts broke out. With the aim of preventing the army from entering Tiananmen, protesters used weapons to block the way and fight the army. Many soldiers were beaten to death. Besides, the army also opened fire and hit people in the streets. Even many people standing in the apartment buildings were also injured. The climax was on June 4, 1989. For midnight, tanks, armored vehicles, troops with machine guns, and paratroopers were brought into the square. There was no evidence for exactly what happened, only that all the lights in Tiananmen were turned off, and at 6 a.m. everything was clean. Many sources said that the army opened fire and even used armored vehicles to run over the protesters. However, others said no gunshots were heard. The clash caused terrible loss of life. According to Chinese authorities, 241 people were killed, including dozens of soldiers. According to Western press, there were sources that say 1,000 people died. There were also other sources that have 2,000 deaths. The highest is 10,000 people. After this event, General Secretary Hu Yaobang and his faction were expelled, and he was housed for the rest of his life. So you've already had a better understanding about the Tiananmen event, right? Thanks for watching. Goodbye.